Good evening, my name is Richard Medhurst. We're very happy about England's victory last night, but I want to talk about something a bit more serious regarding the Palestinian Football Association and what's been happening to their players. Since October 7, Israel have killed more than 300 Palestinian athletes, of which 231 are football players. We've got over 60 children from the Youth Academy that have been killed by Israel as well. Now, the Palestine Football Association have been trying to get Israel officially expelled by FIFA, which is the world governing body of all the football associations. So joining me to talk about that is the head of the Palestine Football Association legal team and an associate professor of sports law.
Her name is Katarina Pijetlovic. She's also the author of EU Sports Law and Breakaway Leagues in Football.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for joining us and for talking about this very important topic. If I could just perhaps go through what happened back in May. There was the FIFA Congress, right? And all of the football associations convened together. My understanding is that the head of the FIFA organization, the president, Gianni Infantino, he deferred the issue to July 20th. So you have a date coming up in just a little over a week to talk about this. Is that correct?
That's correct. What happened is that according to FIFA regulations and the right of every association, Palestine Football Association requested FIFA to place an item on the agenda of its Congress. Congress is like a parliament. It's where all the football associations of the world sit and they have all equal vote, which is important, right? So the Palestine request or proposal was to place this item on the Congress agenda to sanction Israel for multiple breaches of FIFA's regulation. Some of them, well, I'm sure we will discuss later, but just procedurally how this went is that happened in March, that we submitted that proposal. And since the proposal was submitted, the Israeli Football Association has basically recruited the government and the military. Surprisingly, I've never heard in sports anybody recruiting military to, in their own words, torpedo the proposal of the Palestinian Football Association, so it never even reaches Congress agenda. And that's exactly what happened in May. When the Congress was, that day of the Congress, president of the FIFA came out and announced that this is being remitted to FIFA Council. FIFA Council consists of 37 individuals, presidents of the confederation, such as Schäferin for the UEFA, but also the English FA chair, but she's Debbie Hewitt, I think. So these 37 people in the council will now decide on 20th July, and we have submitted 58 pages of legal arguments to the council's appointed legal experts that are independent, and they are supposed to advise FIFA on how to decide on this issue. We are now expecting on 20th July what FIFA is going to decide, and we are not expecting much because the issue is more political than legal and regulatory.
What I'm wearing is essentially a kufiyeh with all the countries that were in the Qatar World Cup. And back then, Russia was disqualified within days because of what was happening in Ukraine. And I'm just struggling to understand why FIFA are essentially postponing the issue when they so hastily and so readily expelled the Russians. I mean, we saw a lot of changes back then, didn't we? I remember that corner flags on the actual football pitches in some countries and some league matches, I think in Germany, they were replaced with Ukraine flags, which I've never seen before. I know that football fans would be punished or the clubs would be fined if the fans brought Palestinian flags, but then it became okay to bring Ukrainian flags. It seems there's a bit of a double standard there, isn't there? Are these things that you're also raising with FIFA?
Absolutely. There are glaring double standards right from the start. As you mentioned, Russia was expelled within 4 days of the invasion. And at that time, we had there was no casualties among the football players in Ukraine. It took IOC, FIFA, UEFA, everybody just 4 days to expel Russia. This was the decision that cannot be now squared with what is happening with Israel and Palestine. At the time, Ukraine was provided, and the sports people of Ukraine and sports club with millions in support. UEFA broke the sponsorship deal worth millions with Gazprom at the time. So there were a lot of actions being taken to, on the one hand, help Ukrainian sports and sports people, and on the other hand, to punish Russia for invading Ukraine. But right now, we see absolutely no concern whatsoever from any organization that matters in the global football community that would, do the same for Palestinian footballers, of which we have 231 killed footballers right now, 66 of which are children from the youth academy, basically. And that is just a horrific record. Nobody has raised any concerns at all about this. There is no action against Israeli FA. They can say that this is a political matter. We are not interfering as per our political neutrality principle, and that is fine. But there are issues that make the club's players and even Israeli FA complicit in this, because they are supporting IDF. They are providing moral and practical support. They are cheering on the war in Gaza, and some players are calling literally for annihilation of Gaza altogether, erase it permanently, one footballer said. So we have about 10, 12 players that have made a genocidal statement or incitement to genocide. It's contrary to the ICJ orders, which also can apply to influential people like football players in national team.
Right.
Yeah, so that is a huge issue.
You bring up the crux of the issue, which is that the Football Association in any country would say, well, we're apolitical. And FIFA, of course, toe that line when it comes to Palestine, and yet they ban the Russians. So, I mean, either they have to ban the Israelis as well, or they have to reinstate Russia and be completely neutral from now on. Is that the position that you're taking in general? Can we call that a fair assessment?
For now, looking at history, Russia is not the only one that was suspended. It's just the latest one that was suspended. So the comparison with Russia is kind of inevitable. It's just happened 2 years ago. But there were other countries as well. There was Yugoslavia. There was South Africa during the period of apartheid. We have Azerbaijan that was also suspended. In 2014, Russian teams were kicked out because Russia joined the teams from occupied Crimea, and it is in international law considered occupied, so that these teams couldn't join the Russian leagues. You're right, there's definitely double standards, and political neutrality is a concept that is written on paper. There is no such thing as political neutrality of sport at all. We have seen, as I said, governments, politicians Netanyahu called Infantino to thank him in 2017 for pretty much doing the same thing as now, not following the monitoring committee Israel-Palestine report that FIFA itself established in 2015 before Infantino to monitor and report on the issues that face Palestinian and Israeli football. And when this committee came up with the report, according to which Israel is supposed to be basically sanctioned if it doesn't comply within 6 months, FIFA completely ignored that. And it's very strange because it was Infantino that when Russian Football Union tried to field clubs from occupied Crimea, they were kicked out by, we can call it European branch of FIFA, UEFA. And the interesting part is that UEFA Secretary General at the time, who instructed Russian Football Association to stop holding matches in occupied Crimea, was Mr. Infantino, the current UEFA president, who is now completely ignoring the fact that Israeli Football Association is joining the clubs from the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem in its national league in Israel, and also, perhaps even more concerningly, hosting matches on this in West Bank, which belongs to the Palestinian Association territory, which is in clear breach of the FIFA territorial integrity principle in the statutes, and UEFA's as well. It's equivalent.
So
Palestinians cannot even enter these matches. So there is an element of apartheid there.
So there's not just hypocrisy on FIFA's part, but the president himself, Infantino, because he told the Russians when he was UEFA president to abide by the territorial integrity statutes within the charters, and then now when it comes to FIFA, where he's been promoted, he turns a blind eye. That's very interesting.
Yeah, he was the general secretary of UEFA, just to correct you, not the president, but yeah, he was quite influential person in UEFA.
May I ask you, because I saw Israel casually playing matches for this Euro Cup, that's the finals on Sunday, right? So they were trying to qualify for it while this genocide was happening, with no impediment whatsoever. No one was discussing the fact that you know, we have this glaring contradiction. Are you asking UEFA to also expel the Israelis? So not just from FIFA, from the world governing body, but also from the Euro Cup organizer?
Well, according to some FIFA and UEFA, almost kind of an unspoken deal, and including some UEFA statutes provisions, if FIFA expels a member, that will be followed by the confederation. So UEFA will expel.
Okay, understood. I'm glad you touched on two things that I wanted to come back to anyway, which is the issue of territorial integrity, and then also these statements by Israeli footballers. And I'll pull them up on the screen if that's okay with you. You posted a very interesting thread. You said, meet the Israeli national football team, active IDF soldiers and reservists, who glorify and support the IDF, and you put some of their statements. So we have one here, for example, from Sean Weissman, who is in the Israeli national football team, and he also plays in a club in Italy, and he is right now in the Israeli Air Force, and he said, destroy, so quote, destroy, tighten, crush, to God's revenge. All of Gaza supports terrorism. All of Gaza is dead. What is the logical reason why 200 tons of bombs have not already been dropped on Gaza? Really just amazing statements here. There's another one from Yosefi, who plays in an Israeli football team. He said, quote, I only have hope that this time there will be no concessions and that there will be no drop of morality in the IDF, and will erase Gaza permanently. Isn't calling to murder other players in FIFA banned by the charter, never mind by the law?
Of course, it does represent hate speech, and obviously it clashes clearly with FIFA's human rights policies and human rights commitments from its statutes. And there is a document called FIFA Human Rights Policy. So when you read it and compare it to what is happening, it doesn't really chime. The players obviously breach disciplinary code. They should be disciplined. They should be expelled, in fact, from football. Because these are some of the worst and gravest hate speech examples that I have seen in my life in football or in sport, that players are calling for to erase Gaza, where, of course, other clubs and other players are already being erased. That is quite, you know, it's astonishing that this is going unpunished and that this is happening with impunity. But there is, and there is, of course, the binding ruling of the ICJ. There is order to prevent and punish public incitement to genocide. That is one of the orders. And who is bound by this? Influential figures, among others, public figures. And I think national team players and clubs that are also involved in support and cheering on IDF are actually bound by these things, and they're breaching the International Court of Justice binding orders to stop and to not do anything that can constitute incitement to genocide. So it's quite astonishing that it is going on unpunished. And if you can, yes, perhaps, if you remember, maybe in January last year, that the Olympic Executive Board, they had this strict criteria for readmission of only individual players, so not team players and not teams from Russia and Belarus. And those were as follows. So only individual neutral athletes that are not contracted to military or security forces can compete. Only athletes who fully respect Olympic Charter can compete. The Olympic Charter, by the way, there is a peace mission clearly specified in several provisions. So the first thing that this...
So sorry, I'll let you continue in just a second, but the first point you mentioned is that they cannot be in the army, right? If they're Russian, they cannot be in the army. Well,
that's true. They cannot be contracted to.
And these Israelis in the football team, every single one of them is in the army. Did I understand correctly that you cannot even join the Israeli football team unless you've been in the army?
That is exactly what is happening. You have to have been in the army. You might have been in some lesser role, or perhaps not in such a position somewhere, but you have to have served in the army. Otherwise, you cannot be on a national team, and that it's applicable to all sports, I guess, in football in particular. There was IDF tweet, I think, from 2013, where they are discussing an article actually on their website, where they're discussing why Israeli athletes and footballers are such great soldiers and vice versa.
Wow.
There is quite a mix and quite integration between army and sport in Israel.
Wow, that's amazing. So you essentially have people who are potentially implicated, very likely implicated in illegal occupation, in war crimes, pretending to be nothing but athletes and just walking around. Whereas I know that Palestinian footballers, for example, they couldn't even make some of the matches in the last couple of months because they were trapped in Gaza. Many of them have been killed, as we were just saying. Hundreds of them have been killed. It's really unbelievable. It feels very dystopian to me in any case.
And 11 in the West Bank. Let's not forget there are people in
yes.
the West Bank, footballers, that are also being detained. 9 of them, and 11 have been killed.
Speaking of the West Bank, just to make sure I understood this correctly. So we know that there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis living illegally inside of the West Bank, which is by itself, just by living there, it's a violation of international law. But if you set up a football club there, you're violating the rules inside of UEFA and FIFA, because that territory is internationally recognized as Palestine. So, for example, Scotland cannot go and install football teams inside of England, and this is the same principle. So by doing that, Israelis are violating the rules in FIFA just in the West Bank alone, never mind Gaza. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is the illegal settlement club issue that has been lingering for many, many years, and that FIFA has always delayed a decision on. This is the clearest breach of the statutes that there is, because FIFA statutes themselves say that the territory must be, where the clubs are located, must be the territory where they're playing. It has to belong to that national association, and this is clarified as the territory of the country. So it coincides with the territory of the country as recognized by the international community according to FIFA statutes and the IOC charter. So it's now looking who decides on what is international community. Well, that's UN. In UEFA statutes, we have pretty clearly indicated that that's UN, and that even country doesn't even have to be recognized formally. But if most of the countries of the UN recognize it as such, as a state, then that's good enough for UEFA. And we can draw some analogies there. But the one thing we know for sure is that West Bank is not Israeli. It's not an Israeli territory, so that it can be belonging to Israeli International Olympic Committee, ergo it's national federations such as Israeli FA. And so they should be staging only within Israel proper every single match, and that is where the clubs are supposed to be located as well. Otherwise, let me quote something from a Human Rights Watch report from 2016. Otherwise, they are saying that FIFA is then sponsoring games on a seized land, which is...
so FIFA is directly complicit?
Excuse me? So
FIFA is directly complicit by allowing this to go on?
There is the entire Human Rights Watch report for from 2016, and in fact there are several of them where they are urging FIFA to stop violating international law and contributing to human rights violations in West Bank, which is exactly what every single UN resolution on this particular matter says, is that Israeli settlements constitute a flagrant breach of international law, and of course any business and any any contribution to these settlements is also in violation of international law. So you can say that, yes, FIFA is in a way complicit in these violations. The Israeli FA is not reacting to it. In fact, they are the ones that are including these clubs, and FIFA is allowing it. So without, and also UEFA, let's not forget UEFA, because Israel is playing in Europe.
Right.
They were part of the Asian Confederation where they naturally belong, because nobody, I think, wanted to play with them. So they found Europe to play in. So UEFA should be concerned about this as well.
That's a very interesting point that you raised, because just recently we had the Eurovision Song Contest, another thing that Russia is also banned from, and Israel was not. And I know more people focused on that than they did on the Euro Cup, but it certainly didn't escape my gaze that but we had this hypocrisy in both organizations. I'd like to ask you as well about the players themselves. The women's team, is the women's team any different from the men's team in the regards that we just laid out?
Not really. They have themselves been in the army. They themselves are active in the army. They themselves support publicly IDF. They have pictures of themselves with machine guns and uniforms. And yeah, so there's even one or a few videos, in fact, that they themselves made where they are kind of in the military uniform, and then they jump and they are all of a sudden in this football gear. So this is showing that, you know, they don't know how to distinguish between their footballing career and they're not just innocent victims of their government's, you know, politics. They are in fact very eager participants in everything that is happening, and none of them very sadly has said anything about their colleagues dying in such numbers and all the football fields being crashed. I don't know how you don't have to be, you know, Palestinian to actually feel sorry for every football field being destroyed. And we know the Yarmouk Stadium where, you know, where Israeli army held 10-year-old boys blindfolded and in their underwear, and elderly men. And at the same time, you could see while that concentration camp was going on in the middle of the football field, you could see this bulldozer, military bulldozer, destroying the pitch just for fun, for absolutely no other reason but to take it away from Palestinians so they cannot use it. And this is, of course, you've probably seen the latest video. Was it today's or yesterday's? I don't remember. Where people are playing football in some of those schools, and they get bombed. So FIFA is saying nothing about any of this, which is quite shocking indeed, that everything is going unpunished, while you could say, well, that's politics, that's war, FIFA is not going to interfere. And nobody's asking FIFA to interfere into war and politics, just to apply their own statutes to the clear cases of racial hatred, and hate speech, illegal clubs, illegal settlement clubs, to the issues of the fact that Israeli FA is having the support of the government in everything that it does. Government is interfering and military is now interfering. That is not independently handling their affairs as per FIFA statutes, or it's required of every FA from the FIFA statutes. We have multiple breaches and more, of course, that are just completely going without any punishment at all.
I'd like to show the Yarmouk Stadium that you just mentioned on the screen and what's become of it, because it's heartbreaking. I mean, you can see these marks that you were talking about, how they've purposely and specifically leveled and dug up the ground to make it unusable. And of course, there's the images that you were mentioning of people being held like this, blindfolded, their eyes and heads covered, which by itself is against Geneva Convention and international law to treat prisoners like that in any regard, even if they're military, which they're very visibly not. Not a single one of these people is in uniform. So in any case, it's absolutely unbelievable that there is no more outrage about this and the destruction of the football fields. Do you have a figure perhaps of how many stadiums have been destroyed? Because I understood that every sports facility has been destroyed in Gaza. Is that correct?
It's been either damaged severely or destroyed. There is 47 stadiums, and some of them are in West Bank as well. So that's not, most of them are in Gaza. 41, I think, in Gaza, and 6 in West Bank, if I'm not mistaken. And that's football fields. I think that there is even a document with all the pictures of before and after that Palestine Football Association published at some point at their social media.
Unbelievable. Again, I'm shocked every day. I cover this war full-time, professionally, and I'm shocked every day by the dimensions of it, the multifaceted ways in which the Palestinian society and fabric is being ripped apart. It's very shocking. And, you know, if I could ask you as well about opponents in other sports categories, martial arts, whatever it is, when they've faced Israeli opponents, we've seen players forego those matches and decide to disqualify themselves rather than play against an Israeli opponent. We've seen that in all sorts of sporting events. My question is, do you think that that is a potential strategy that you could lobby other football associations to do if you're not successful with your lobbying efforts with FIFA? Because if you can't expel the Israeli team, I suppose the next option is to just simply refuse to play against them. That's where I'm coming from, because that's what I was used to seeing karate players do, for example. They would just say, I'm not going to play against Israelis.
Yes, and they would get punished for it, right?
Yeah.
There was at least some cases where they would get punished for it. Lobbying with other FAs to say we are not going to play against Israel is it's a bit harder than it looks. But let's not forget that 12 West Asian football federations that include, Yemen and Syria and Iran and Iraq and Lebanon and so on, Jordan, that they have in fact sent a letter to FIFA asking to sanction Israel. That was quite many months ago.
So which countries have supported your bid to expel Israel from FIFA, just so we can list them in one go?
So all of the West Asian Football Federation, except for Saudi Arabia and I think Qatar and United Arab Emirates. So all the 9 others have supported. So if you just look for West Asian Football Federation members, you will see the 9 others that have supported it. To get country, there is a consequence for each FA that says, I don't want to play Israel, because they can get punished by FIFA. And that is what everybody's afraid of.
Wow.
However, if you remember what happened when Russia got banned, one of the main reasons that was kind of put forward by FIFA was, well, look, Sweden, and I think it was Czech and Poland, they said they are not going to play Russia. So we cannot criticize that from a moral or legal point of view, and we have to take that into account. So we have to continue our competitions smoothly and not interrupt the program and so on and so on. So we have to kick out Russia for that reason, and for the reason of safety and security at events, which, they said that there is a massive, enormous risk to safety and security at events, and it cannot even be staged at the neutral territory as the Russian FA requested at the time. So that was the attitude back then, and this is the attitude now.
I'm seeing multiple hypocrisies here in one. It's quite staggering. So just so I understand this correctly, when it came to Russia being banned, they said, well, Sweden doesn't want to play against you, so that's reason enough, or there's a handful of countries that don't want you, so we have to ban you. Well, if most of the West Asian Football Federation are saying we don't want to play against Israel, shouldn't FIFA then take that into account and ban the Israeli team?
They didn't go that far, because I think FAs are quite afraid of the consequences. We are dealing with a very powerful lobby. Let's not forget that. Whatever you see in politics, and I know you know politics in and out, you can just, by analogy, apply that to football and to all other sports, and that's what you get. You get a lot of double standards, you get a lot of hypocrisy, and you get a lot of impunity given to Israel. And yeah, that's about it. That sums it up, I guess.
So there's a very important question I need to ask. Football fans who are in Egypt, for example, because again, we are talking about the most popular sport in the world. So you can find football fans anywhere, but I want to ask specifically about Arab football fans who are watching this right now. They, in all likelihood, most of them, 99.9%, all agree with your case and back you 100%. However, what about their football associations? What about the official positions? Because you spoke about applying the political analogy. Well, you know, when you told me Saudi Arabia, for example, don't back this move, I wasn't surprised one bit, precisely because I know their politics. I can imagine that in some Arab countries, you're going to have the football associations that simply have a completely different position from what the fans actually want. Is that correct?
Well, in Egypt in particular, now that you mentioned, I think government has been quite successful in repressing even mentioning of the Palestinian issue or any protests or anything like that. Yeah. So I wouldn't imagine that, you know, Egyptian FA is at liberty to do what it wants in a way.
Yes.
I would imagine that there is no freedom to act on their part. So we don't know under which pressure these, you know, FAs are. That's one thing. And of course, fans would expect their FA to, in fact, support the Palestinian proposal now in FIFA Council on 20th July, because I think Egyptian FA president is on the FIFA Council that is going to decide this issue. And there are 5 Arab countries, in fact. I believe Saudis might be one. I think Jordan might be. Jordan has been extremely supportive, and they were probably leading that entire West Asia Football Federation.
That's good to hear. That I wouldn't have expected that. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised to hear that. That's very good.
Yeah, they were talking on Congress. They were the only ones, apart from the Asian Football Confederation, that was speaking on behalf of Palestinians. So when the floor was given to the associations, everybody stayed silent because. Again, there is a lot of lobbying, there is a lot of politics. Nobody wants to be that nail that sticks out, that's going to get hammered down. So there has to be some unity among, say, a bigger number of the association to come out together in support of Palestine and against Israel FA participation due to all of these violations of FIFA statutes. And then maybe in cohort and together they will feel more comfortable rather than isolated and alone and being this individual association that supports Palestine. They're kind of afraid of the consequences. That's the reality.
I'd like to ask you about Indonesia. Indonesia was supposed to host a rather prestigious sporting event, and they were stripped of that by FIFA, if I'm not mistaken. Because there was ambiguity regarding whether Israel would be allowed to play because Indonesia doesn't recognize Israel. So, you know, FIFA had no problem moving ahead with you know, that move. Can you perhaps shed more light on that for us, please?
Yes, that is just one in the series of disruptions to the normal FIFA schedule and to UEFA schedule as well, because we've seen many club matches being disrupted, simply moved to another country, moved by 45 minutes, you know, to start later because a fan has entered the field and chained himself for the goalpost wearing the Free Palestine T-shirt or something like that. So there are loads of disruptions that are happening, and one of the most tragic ones for fans is the fact that they cannot watch their national team play against Israel because everything is now being played behind the closed doors. And again, that inevitable comparison with the treatment of Russia and now the treatment of Israel is that FIFA was arguing in the Court of Arbitration for Sport that it is quite disruptive and it is quite unfair to other team to do that to them, so that the fans cannot watch them. The sponsors cannot be seen by all these fans, so they can't get their money's worth. They can't sell their products, merchandise, and it was considered by the Court of Arbitration for Sport as a major inconvenience back when Russia was being banned, and then they appealed that decision. So this came about. And now we see none of it, even though we have loads of disruptions, loads of inconveniences to other teams that have to be rescheduled, reshuttled, and matches were postponed by 1 month even, and so on. And none of it is happening. So Indonesia just falls into that general scheme of what appears to be trying to keep Israel in as a participant at all costs. And I say at all costs because we have already seen even the physical injuries where an Arab guy was beaten half to death in Greece. So there is a safety.
So that seems.
He was beaten by Israeli fans of a football club that it was a UEFA Conference League match between Israeli team and local Greek team. So there was an Arab there, which didn't end well for him, but it could have ended worse. There is an issue of safety and security at events which FIFA cannot ensure. And FIFA, in fact, delegates this issue to national organizers. So it doesn't washes its hands of safety and security issues. However, if you delegate something that is not possible to arrange, and you are asking of football associations and their countries to stage a safe and secure match when it is not possible. It is not possible according to insurance companies now that are insuring Olympics. So German insurance companies and English insurance companies are both very, very worried about the attacks. And it is they are attributing it, according to the Reuters report, to the presence of Israeli teams. So if FIFA doesn't ban Israeli teams, they are keeping that major risk, what they considered in the Russian cases, enormous security risk that was quote.
Right, that's what I was about to say. I find that a bit weird because they said we can't have Russian matches because you can't play safely. And the Russians even said we'll go play behind closed doors, so no fans are allowed. It's just a match between 22 players, and they still refuse that. And now you have Arab fans being beaten up by Israelis, and security doesn't seem to be an issue for FIFA. Amazing.
And that was just one of the series of incidents. There were many others, So in France, they have averted the real terrorist attack. The ISIS was said to threaten UEFA quarterfinals, and now Olympics has never been under more threat than these days, so that even insurance companies say that it cannot be effectively policed.
Wow. I mean, it's really incredible. And speaking of threats, I just want to make sure I understood this correctly, because the head of the Palestine Football Association, Jibril Rajoub, when he was at the Bangkok Congress, the FIFA Congress in Bangkok, he held up this letter or a warning that he had received from the Israelis to arrest him. Is that correct? That they threatened him with arrest if...
It was a foreign minister of Israel, whose name is Israel Katz, who was posted on his Twitter account that Jibril is a terrorist in suit, and he's going to be playing football between the four walls. We are going to imprison him. And that was all because Palestine FA exercised their right under FIFA statutes and made a proposal for an item to be placed on Congress agenda.
Which is the right of every country, every football association in FIFA.
Every football, yeah. Just
for raising the issue in May to expel the Israelis for violating FIFA's rules, they threatened the head of the Palestine Football Association with arrest, and then they didn't put it on the Congress agenda and deferred it to July 20th. Just so I understand this correctly.
Yes, that is true. In the meanwhile, between making a proposal in March, because you have to make it 2 months before Congress, which is in May. So between March and May, there was a lot of action on behalf of Israeli government and even military, which I was surprised to read that military got somehow involved to torpedo that proposal. And obviously, there was a minister of foreign affairs who was threatening with imprisonment. And by the way, General Secretary of Palestinian Football Association has been twice arrested already. Shortly, but arrested.
Wow. I mean, I can't imagine anyone threatening the head of the English FA with arrest for any matter. Never mind someone who is under occupation and suffering under genocide. Because again, I know the West Bank and Gaza are split up geographically, but Israel occupies the West Bank and is destroying Gaza. So, you know, every Palestinian is affected by this. The whole world is affected by this. It's unbelievable that, you know, we have a phrase for this in English. It's adding insult to injury. That's what that letter is. Can I ask you, Katarina, when the July 20 meeting is convened, how does the procedure work exactly? You know, are you given a chance to go and present the case? Will you be in attendance? What happens exactly? How many votes do you need from this 35-member council, if I recall correctly?
It's a very good question, because nobody knows what the procedure is. There is now this committee that they have set up ad hoc. It consists of 2 people from Switzerland, one from Swiss University Neuchâtel, which is known as a FIFA university. So this is the 2 persons from Switzerland that in the independent experts committee to advise FIFA Council on how to decide on this issue. And this is something novel. It just came out of nowhere, so we didn't really know whether or not we are going to even get their answer, their recommendation to FIFA Council, whether we will ever get to see it, just as a matter of due process and procedural fairness. If we have submitted 58 pages of legal arguments, we would like to see what the committee actually advised FIFA, so that we can evaluate FIFA's own decision. Because in 2017, as we mentioned, FIFA just decided to ignore the report of its own monitoring committee set up specifically for this purpose, and just keep Israel instead. So there's a lot of things that FIFA is sacrificing, including, as we mentioned, safety and security of fans. They are basically risking people's lives here, literally. There can be a major attack, there can be some stabbing incident, but it can lead to fatality. But this is a good enough price to pay to keep Israel participating for FIFA. So I mean, there's nothing, you know, that they can do, it seems, to trigger the actual enforcement of the clear rules.
Because it's a self-governing body, right? So there's no one to really hold it to account. I mean, if you're not successful, is there any appeals process? Because you just mentioned that this whole thing is ad hoc and it's just been randomly set up. So you perhaps don't even know the answer to that question. If there's an appeals process, they can just say no, and then close the issue. Can you go to a court of arbitration afterwards, perhaps?
Yes. Yes, we can. We can go to court of arbitration, and but there's another thing. Court of arbitration for sport is like a supreme court for sports in the world, where you can appeal the decisions of the governing bodies, such as FIFA. And if you go there, we have to know again another thing, that court is heavily financed by International Olympic Committee and FIFA.
Oh, great! So you don't know if it's impartial, essentially.
We kind of know that it's been criticized for not being impartial.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask you about measures that fans can take, because one of the hallmarks of this entire period since October 7 has been mass protests around the world. We've seen the biggest pro-Palestine protests in history in the West. We've seen student encampments, the biggest anti-war movement since the Vietnam War. We've seen massive boycotts of Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Starbucks, you name it. Why don't we see that in football? What can we do to have fans exert pressure on FIFA to just simply follow its own rules?
Yes, I think in each country, especially now in FIFA Council countries, you can just type in FIFA Council members into Google search and scroll down to see whether or not your country has a representative on the council. And you could try and ask them to actually vote in favor of Palestine and to suspend Israel. That is one thing people can do locally in their own countries. Another thing that can be done is, as you mentioned, the major boycott, global boycott of main sponsors of FIFA and IOC. I think Coca-Cola, that you mentioned, is one of the bigger ones, because, you know, ultimately, none of the products and none of the football matches in the world really is worth what is happening, and giving your money to this in a small way contributes to that entire system. So let's not be the kind of people that are, you know, bread and circuses and we are fine, just give us that and we'll be fine. Let's look for more, and let's try to change something. We are a certain organized fan group unity and actions on social media. There's a lot that fans can in fact do in order to peacefully isolate Israel. And to do that is to start by perhaps banning them from sports in international community, because sport has always been a symbol of culture, a symbol of peace that's supposed to be bringing people together. And this has now become basically a showcase for Israeli soldiers. So all of the people in Israeli Olympic team, most of them are going to be soldiers. In the IDF, most of them are going to be supportive of IDF. And, you know, we don't know what have they personally done, but we do know that according to that International Olympic Committee guidelines for Russians, where they cannot be members of the army and they cannot be posting in favor of the army on social media, because that's considered support for war, and then they cannot participate in Olympic sports. Why don't we apply the same thing to Israeli athletes and just insist from the federations, football federations in your countries, to push for Palestine rights, and that's the best probably that a fan can do.
I'd like to add also something that came to mind. I remember when Wimbledon, for example, in the tennis world, Wimbledon and other championships, they demanded that any Russian or players from Belarus as well, I believe, denounce the Russian government and the Belarusian government openly as a condition, as a prerequisite in order to compete in the tournament. And some of them actually did go ahead and do that, and they were still banned anyway from participating, which was quite the circus. And I just see such a contrast because they were not even in the army; they were just civilians, and they were still forced to denounce the war effort. Whereas Israelis are in the army; they're part of the armed forces, and they can just go ahead and participate with no impediment whatsoever. I find that quite well, hypocritical, to say the least. I don't know if, how else to put it, frankly.
Yeah, you see that we are always going back to the same thing: hypocrisy, double standards. And double standards are permeating sports at the moment with the way that governing bodies are treating Israel and Palestine, and how they used to treat Russia and Belarus and Ukraine. So I would just like to see the same standards applied in this case. That's all. If there are rules, then they should be equal to all. Otherwise, it's not just violating Palestinian human rights, it's also discriminating, contrary to Article 4 of the FIFA statutes, discriminating between the football associations, discriminating between players, you know, because when Ukraine was in trouble, they jumped in with millions. They jumped in with contracts to travel to Europe. They jumped in to say, well, hey, it's very unfair that the Russian athletes would be competing and Ukrainian athletes wouldn't be able to compete because of the situation they're in. And they said this at the time when Ukrainians, as today, had 5 different countries to exit from. They had all this support, and compare it to Gaza now, you know, and nobody's concerned about them. It's not double standards. Double standards is a kind way to put it. It is, it's, as you probably pointed it out a couple of times during this conversation, there is an element of complicity in it.
Before I let you go, Katarina, the final is on Sunday, so I thought I'd ask a light-hearted question, given all the nature of what we just discussed. Are you supporting England or Spain? And it's okay if you say Spain. I won't hold it against you.
I just don't care, Richard, at all. I don't watch football, and I just don't.
You don't? I could have sworn that you're an avid fan, but I suppose you're more focused on the scholarly side of it. So that's quite all right.
That's true. I used to play in Estonian first league, but then
wow.
Playing is different than watching. When you know how the meal is being cooked, you're not going to really enjoy the meal as much. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we see. We just see the end product, and everything behind it is, pretty shocking in so many ways. The football governance itself is in need of a major repair, but there is nobody to hold them to account.
No, I completely understand. I really understand, and I think that's actually the most sensible thing you could say after everything we just laid out. Could I have you back on on July 21st after the meeting has been held? Because I'd love to follow up on this with you and keep this in the mainstream, because I mean, I myself, I'm very interested in football, and of course I cover what's happening in Palestine, so I'd be very happy to have you back on if that's all right.
Oh, I'd be happy to, definitely.
Thank you so much, Katarina. I'm very grateful to you for coming on. It's really an honor to have you. And good luck with your mediation efforts, and I hope you deliver some justice for the hundreds of Palestinian athletes that have been murdered by Israel, and of course Palestine as a whole. Because what you're doing is you're not just representing the Football Association; you're really kind of spearheading it for the whole nation. I think everyone can see that and appreciate that.
Thank you very much for having me here, Richard. I love your show, and this was an honor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, YouTube demonetized my channel because I'm not allowed to say naughty things about Israel. Telling the truth is forbidden. So if you are able to donate a few dollars on PayPal or on a monthly basis on Patreon, please consider doing it, because it would really help me continue my journalism and support independent media. So I'd be very grateful. And the links are in the description and also in the chat. Thank you guys very much again for all your donations and all your kind comments. I appreciate it very much.